Hello, everybody, and welcome to Outraised Voices. I'm Sharon Lee Williams, your host. And if you've been here before, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for coming back and joining me in this conversation. If you are new here, thank you for joining us. And next time, bring a friend. But today, our CEO today, whew, her name is Dr. Natasha Williams. Now, off the bat, I'm going to say, no, we are not related. We are not related. All right, so let's get that out of your head right now. Dr. Natasha Williams is a clinical psychologist, radical self-care, wellness, and leadership expert, and one of the founding clinical directors of Allied Psychological Services in Toronto, Canada, which is an anti-oppressive, I'm going to ask her about that, multi-ethnic, multilingual psychological clinic. Now, Dr. Williams is also a best-selling author, an international speaker, and a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion corporate trainer. So, I could have gone on with what you do, Dr. Natasha, because you have a lot of accomplishments. Beaucoup, they say in Montreal. Lots of accomplishments. You are just an all-rounder mega woman.
Thank you.
That's what I look at. So you were also an author of a number of books, actually. And today I have my trusty little book here with me. You have a series called Embracing Self-Love. It's part of a series, right?
Correct.
All right. And 30 days to fall in love with yourself and nurture your self-worth.
Correct, yes.
This is our theme today, everybody. We're going to talk about self-love. Now, for those of you, if you want to go deeper into this, please go to Dr. Natasha's website and get a copy of her book and series of books and just check it out. But today, in keeping in line with the theme of the show, with what we're talking about, people who are raised outside of raised outside of their country, raised in foster care, raised as adoptees, we want to, as well as adults, and not just adults and youth and all that raised in care, we want to talk about self-love and how do we do that? How do we do that well? How do we get out of our own way? Because most of you know that I am part of the system. I was raised in foster care from the time I was a baby until I transitioned out of care. So that's why this is a very important subject for me, because it leads into relationships when you become an adult and you think you're over all of this stuff, but it comes up and bites you kind of in the rear. Let's say that. Let's say that nicely, bites you in the rear. So, first question, what is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? What do you...
Okay. Yes. So, and this is a great question because there is a lot of confusion about the differentiation between the two. The easiest thing to say is that we're similar in a lot of ways. So let's start there. So we have the ability to treat, to diagnose different psychological, psychiatric disorders. The differentiation, first of all, is in our education. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. So they go to med school, they get their medical doctoral degree, and they also have the ability to prescribe medication. Whereas a psychologist, they also have a doctorate, but it's not a medical doctorate. We aim to study the basis of behavior. So in some states, I will say that they do have the ability to prescribe medication. Whereas in Ontario and a lot of other jurisdictions, we don't prescribe medication.
Okay.
But what we do is we look at the foundations of behavior, and then we look at different strategies and interventions. Once we're able to communicate a diagnosis, which we do through different tests and psychological tests and measures, how do we then look at what is the basis of behavior, and how do we then start to transform an individual to see things in a different way and to actually chart a different course in life? So we look at different coping mechanisms, but also reframing a lot of things that have been maybe foundational for this individual that has caused maybe a lot of what's going on with this individual at this point in time. So a lot of similarities, but we don't describe per se to a medical model of treatment in
Oh.
terms of just prescribing medication.
Okay, so you're dealing with, as you said, the foundations really of a person. What makes you, how can we find strategies to help you through, help
Right.
you not necessarily overcome, but help you to understand, I guess, understand.
Yes, and I love the way that you use not necessarily just overcome, because sometimes with the word overcome, we think that there's a forgetting of.
Yes.
Whereas what we want to aim to do is, how do we allow the person to work through? If it means that there is some pain involved, there's an understanding of that. But we have to look at the analogy I usually use is that when you're extinguishing a fire, you have to extinguish the fire from the base. So if we're only providing coping strategies for what you see on the surface, a lot of times what you'll find is that the fire is still smoldering at the base. So we now
Hmm.
understand what is allowing that fire to smolder still, so that when the person then comes up on other challenges and those kinds of things, the fire doesn't go ablaze again. They now have the strategies and techniques to understand what's going on and utilize those strategies and their own strengths to work
Right.
through the situation.
So self-love. Now, what does it mean to you? How do you apply self-love in your own life? How did you, how do you, yeah, how did you apply that? How do you wear that?
Oh, I love that. I love the question in terms of how you framed it, in terms of how you wear that, because I think it's important is that you have to wear it every day.
Hmm.
First and foremost, it's not something that just comes automatically for a lot of people. I
Yeah.
think what we have to learn and understand is where our essence comes from. And what I look at and what I had to cultivate for myself is that there's a difference between intrinsic and extrinsic um, areas of validation. And I'll explain that because a lot of times what happens is that when we focus solely on extrinsic or external places of validation, and if that's where our self-love comes from, that ends up being fleeting. So when the person leaves, the situation leaves, the accolade leaves, so does your self-worth and self-love, if that's all it was.
Absolutely.
What I had to aim to do, and what I aimed to then put in my book, was how do we cultivate things from an intrinsic point of view, where regardless of where those things are, because a lot of times we tie our worth to money, to possessions, to people, and if all those things are gone, who am I at my essence and my core? Because I live with myself every day. So then when you frame the question to say, how do you wear that? That piece is important because it's the person I wake up with every day. It's the
Yes.
person that I had to then really truly figure out for myself, who am I? Who am I in God? And what is my purpose? And
Mm,
while I believed I knew my purpose,
mm.
um, from an early age, I think what happens is that when we look at things from an intrinsic and extrinsic point of view, what we have to look at is that it's not all one or the other, and then sometimes it can go, it could be misbalanced. So
Yes.
what happens is that sometimes your self worth or self love ends up taking a knockdown. You know, a marriage goes awry, a friendship leaves, sometimes, you go bankrupt, all of these types of things. And then you have to reevaluate and see how are things balanced? And I think that's where you have to cultivate this on a day-to-day basis and keep
Mm.
things in check sometimes.
Right. So for youth, I'm going to try to apply this to youth who are transitioning out of care. Now, some
Mm,
of them have very good stories and they feel validated and they feel whole. Others
mhm.
come out and they have no sense of who they are,
That's right.
and are waiting for this love, looking for this love because they don't have a sense of what that looks like, how to wear it for themselves.
Absolutely.
You know, so what are some things that maybe we can, and when I say youth, I'm talking about youth 19, 18,
Mhm.
in their 20s, because we
Yes.
do carry this. We carry this.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
we wear this clothing really well. So what are some practical steps? I don't know if they're practical, but what are some sort of things we can do to sort of say, uh, hi, I'm here. I like me.
Right, right. Well, see, and I think, it's starting with those kinds of phrases. It's like, hi, I'm here. I like me. Sometimes getting to that point is difficult because when you
Yes.
talked about, again, that intrinsic and extrinsic, a lot of times we're so focused. And youth are trying to find their way, right? So
Yep.
this is something that's cultivated over time and will continue to do so.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if we first apply and tell youth that you're not going to have it all figured out right now, so please do not beat up yourself, punish yourself for not having it all right now. You are a work in progress as
Yes.
we are all. So I think that's the first piece I would sort of leave. The second thing I would look at is that sometimes what we do is we put our expectations on individuals or institutions to provide us with that self-love. And a lot of times what can happen is that through several things, through social media, through just social
Yes.
imprinting, we believe
Yes.
that these institutions are supposed to provide us with self-love. So some of these things may have to be challenged. So for example, I'm thinking of someone who maybe, was in foster care and those kinds of things, and your expectation, your hope is that the person who is taking me into care will provide me with some of those tools and skills to give me that boost that I need to carry forward, to be able to cultivate this self-love. And it can be quite possible that the people that are that you're in the care of, or the foster parents, don't have that.
That's right.
They
That's
don't
right.
they don't have it. So in saying that, it's like, okay, what are my expectations and whom am I putting them on? I will say just a bit of an example. When I'm, engaged in psychotherapy and when we're starting to talk about some of these relationships and expectations, when I'm working with a client, what I'll ask them to do is that there's an understanding of what the conceptualization is of a mother.
Mhm.
You have things in your mind, certain points that you believe are tenets that a mother should have. Then I'm going to ask you for your first name of your mother, and I'm going to ask you to put them on this side here. So say your mother's name is Elizabeth.
But can
So
I just stop you right there? Remember, a lot of a lot of youth coming out of care don't have that. Can't name their mother. Like myself, I
ah,
had no
okay.
idea.
Okay, so then I think what's interesting is then if we don't use the name, use the figure,
Use the okay.
whoever that
Yep.
figure is. So if we don't have a name, but there was a
Mhm.
figure that was there, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
sometimes a differentiation between what I have in my mind in terms of that conceptualization of mother
Yes.
versus the person that's underneath that title, which means
Yes.
I have to now, to start to reconcile certain things, I have to now say the person that is underneath that framework cannot fit the tenants that I want them to have. So I'm now putting expectations on a person or a being that cannot fulfill my needs.
Right.
So now in saying that, where do I then get those needs from? I have to now look at other sources.
Right.
to fulfill that requirement. So it could be a friend, it could be a
Yeah.
relative or an adopted relative.
Yeah.
It can be maybe somebody in the school system, a teacher, someone,
Yes.
someone at a church, a pastoral leader. So someone that can fill those tenets and actually pour into that individual. That individual may have to branch out their thinking
Yeah.
so that
Finding
it's
community. Finding
there you go.
community
Yes,
is
that's it.
so key. But
That
I
and
also think that difficulty, there's huge difficulty in finding community for uh, youth
mhm.
who are aging out. It's different than when I aged out. I mean, what do you look? And a lot of teenagers go through this, right? You look for it in a partner. Especially
Mhm.
females. We're
Of
looking for
course.
love in this partner, and all this talk, my better half.
Yes.
All of these things. We don't have the language at
Mhm.
that time to come and say, okay, I'm going to figure me out. I want to figure who I am out.
Right.
Because a lot of us just need someone to, or feel we need someone to attach to.
Exactly. And I think what I had to do for myself, and this is when I was older, but I think if
Yes.
I even heard it when I was younger, it would allow the wheels to start turning.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
I had to take my partner off the pedestal and put God on the pedestal. And the
Wow. Yeah.
reason, that was even told to me, and the reason I even held on to it, because if I start worshiping those people, they end up becoming my idols. And then again, it ends up being misbalanced. It ends up being so extrinsic. If that
Yes.
person leaves or whatever the case may be, there goes my self-worth because I put all of my eggs in that basket. The
Yeah.
minute that someone had told me, put God back on the throne. And again, not everybody's religious, but or whoever that higher being is, put that person on, put that entity on the throne and take the person off the throne, then you know that there's something higher than yourself that you could go
Yes.
to. And that's where I started cultivating some of that intrinsic self-worth. And I think that's where it was so important to feed that. And then there was nobody that could be placed on that throne. I could love somebody,
Yes.
but I would not idolize them.
Yes. Well, now the term self-love, I was thinking, because sometimes people look at when you say, oh, they're so full of themselves, they love themselves. So people can look at that as being narcissistic,
That's the
as opposed to saying, put on your mask first, take
Mhm.
care of yourself. It's important to take care of yourself first, and then
Right.
you're able to give that out. So
Right.
understanding what that even looks
Self-love
like.
is, yes, because I
Yeah.
think that people do confuse some of these terms because
Yeah.
when you look at the whole notion of somebody who's a narcissist loves themselves to the detriment of
Yes.
others. So,
Yes.
you have those sayings that, you'll throw somebody under the bus or whatever the case may be. So when narcissist loves themselves, and they don't care about anybody else.
Yes.
Everything has to be centered and focused on them. When you were talking about self-love, is how do I ensure that my needs are being met and that I love myself enough to be present
Mhm.
for somebody else, so that
Right.
even if I'm taking somebody else's needs into consideration, I also know that I'm important in that equation as well.
Mhm.
A lot of times people, and particularly women,
Yes.
we end up doing is we put everyone else's needs in front of our own because we think we need to be self-sacrificial to be that all-encompassing woman. So what happens is you get burnt out, you get tired, your health starts failing, but my kids, my husband, my parents, my this, my that, and the other. So being able to now say, no, I love myself enough to know that my health, my needs also matter in this equation,
Yeah.
then that's where I think the self-love comes in versus this whole notion of narcissism.
Yeah. And narcissism can be just if somebody is confident. There could be just a confident person,
And then
that we have a story around
that's
that they
it.
are narcissists.
Thank you. Exactly. And see, there's the difference because even as a clinician, we notice that some of these terms that we diagnose are actually used out of context. So narcissistic personality disorder is an actual disorder that is a diagnosable disorder in the context that we use. And we use typically what we call the Diagnostic Statistical Manual to look at these different diagnoses. So it's an actual diagnosis, but again, the term has sort of been taken and it's used in layman's terms, and then a lot of times ends up being jumbled and misused. But confidence again doesn't necessarily mean narcissism.
Exactly.
Because again, being confident in yourself, what's interesting is some people may call it narcissism if they find that they are intimidated of that person's confidence, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it can be at times how the other person is interpreting. So it's no longer narcissism. What it is now pointing to a weakness in the other individual
Yes.
that they're
Yes.
having issues with. So we have to
Lack of
recognize that.
self-confidence. Yes. Yes.
Ah, that's it.
Yes. 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 So I'm going to ask you before we're going to get off the whole self-love thing for a minute because I want to ask you, who was Natasha growing up? How did
Oh,
Natasha become Dr. Natasha Williams? When did that start? Because we talked a little bit about sports before,
yeah.
and I would love for my audience to know that, there's a starting point where you just don't
Yes.
arrive and it's work.
Uh,
It's
yeah.
all, it's work, but there's joy involved too. You have to find some
Yes.
joy.
Yes. And I'll keep it as succinct as possible.
That's okay.
But oh, great, great, great. So, who am I? So, I am a identified African Caribbean Canadian woman, born and raised in Canada. My parents are from the Commonwealth of Dominica, so they immigrated to Toronto in the late 60s. Growing up, it was a great upbringing. I had two strong parents. Unfortunately, my mother passed away when I was 13 years old, so 2 weeks before I would have started high school. And even though that there were other people in the home, because the whole Caribbean notion of it takes a village. So
Yes.
after my mom and my cousin came up, she went back down, married my dad, came up. We had other cousins in the house as well. So even though my mother passed away, there were other people in the house, but my father was very devastated. You could see that, oh my goodness, I'm left to raise two children, one 13, one 11, and two girls. How do I do this? So entering high school, I knew from an early age, I wanted to emulate what my mother represented. So she wasn't a psychologist or anything, but we almost lovingly called her like the psychologist of the Dominican community because
Mm.
everybody went to her. She was the type of person where if she lifted herself up in a certain area, she also wanted to see others lifted up. So she moved from an apartment to buying her home. And when she actually went back to the apartment complex where her friends were and said, if I can do this, you can do this too, and help them also, purchase their own homes because home ownership was so important at that time. She would take money out of her own stocks where she was working to assist with people's down payments to make
Mm.
sure that they could, also have home ownership. So she would always be lifting and pulling people up. And even though she died young, she was 44, but just that energy and that spirit and whom she meant to a lot of people, I wanted to make sure that I had a career that was similar. And that's where I started gravitating towards psychology. So I knew from entering high school, that's where I wanted to go. But I also knew that I wanted to have a strong female voice or strong voice. Let me take the female part out of it for a
Yeah,
second.
yeah, yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I was raised by an amazing father. But sometimes he espoused some very, traditional, female views. Women are supposed to do certain things, not others. And, to me,
For
I had
instance, for instance.
Oh, for instance, so I knew that I remember I was maybe about 15 or 16. We ended up having a clashing of heads. he came downstairs one day and he looked at me and he said, my goodness, I have got two daughters and no one's here straightened to fix me up my breakfast. I don't know, what are they here for? And I remember looking at him like, are you kidding me? Like, are
Mhm.
you absolutely? So we ended up like, I think I blew up and I'm like, I cannot believe that you're saying, now you have to say this respectfully. My dad was like 6'4" and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. But I just said, I go, Dad, I go, you can't say that. I go, and I remember using these terms, are very misogynistic. You can't say that. I don't mind, doing things, but it's not because I'm a woman I do these things. It's
Right.
because I enjoy doing things or whatever. So the task is not connected to my womanhood. And as he got older, he aimed to understand that, but it was a little
Yes,
difficult at the beginning.
of
But I think
course.
also part of what I wanted to do was enter into activities and things that were not seen traditionally for women, but gave me such power and feelings of safety, security, and freedom. And that's where I started playing rugby in
Hmm.
high school. I started when I was I mean, maybe 16. I started playing rugby, and I remember my father just being flabbergasted. He's like, "Oh my goodness, a woman playing rugby. It's too rough of a sport. You shouldn't be playing it. Women shouldn't be playing it." And every time he said I shouldn't is when I played harder.
Of course.
I played for my school. I ended up getting awards for it. Best athlete in the school. But I think what it was for me, it was, seeing yourself, dedicating yourself to something and noticing the accomplishments and the accolades that came after. Because you would go, you would train, we would train behind the school, rain, shine, mud, you name it, we trained in everything. There was such a team camaraderie as well. And
Sports teaches you that. Sport
that's
is a
it.
great teacher
And
for
I think
resilience and
ex-
camaraderie and all of that.
exactly, but also being a sport that, traditionally you didn't really see women, and
Hmm.
having a coach who was the coach of a men's team and then was training us. He trained us no differently. He said these are because he was actually from, I think, Australia or New Zealand, and he came over to Canada. So he's like, I'm training you the same way I train my boys. And the up and down drills and the things where you just thought like, I can't do this any longer. But we became stronger and stronger, and we were a team that were feared. We would go to
Hmm.
different, and we were a very multicultural team as well. So, you have a team who is, again, laid out very multiculturally, and then you're going to these places like north of Ontario where it was not diverse at all, and we're running onto the pitch, and you can see like the eyes open this wide because they're shocked to see this diverse group of girls, and then we can actually play,
Wow.
with no apologies. All you have is a mouth guard. You have no protection. That rugby is not played with protection, just your mouth guard. So we're there, we're tackling, we're doing all of this stuff. And, even the people at our school would come and watch our games and they would be like, oh my goodness. I,
I don't think I've ever met a female rugby player. And I have to say, I dated a rugby player, and I remember the bruises.
oh
The
yeah.
bruises. They had bruises all the time. So,
I came home with a black eye, and my dad nearly lost it because
yeah.
to him, that just proved I told you you're going to get injured, and look, now you come home with this black eye. What's interesting is in hindsight, I knew why he was so afraid. It was because my uncle played for the Caribbean national rugby team and would travel around the world, around the Caribbean. And one match he played, he broke his collarbone. And the injury was quite significant. And I think because his brother was playing and had those type of injuries, seeing his daughter play, he was concerned about my well-being. So, but
He
again,
loves you. He loves you.
exactly. But how it was
My
articulated
baby.
was
Yes.
very different. It was,
Different.
just stop playing because women ain't
Yeah.
supposed to play that. I'm like,
That's
Wrong answer, Dad. Sorry.
Wrong,
But
wrong answer.
it brought a lot, it brought a lot of strength. And I think
Yes.
that was the most beautiful piece of it for sure.
So do you find as a woman you go against the grain, or did you find a middle ground? Is that yeah.
Yeah, and I think it gave me the in high school doing that, and I played actually after I left you after I finished my undergrad in university because I went and found a women's league and stuff like that. It allowed me the space to say I can do whatever. You know,
Yes.
if it's viewed as against the grain, there's a societal reason that it's viewed against the grain. And I don't
Mm,
have to ascribe to that societal rule, norm, whatever. So in whatever I choose, I can I have the right to choose it, and I can choose it unapologetically. And that for me, it gave me that strength as a teenager to then seek out and do the types of things where they thought it would be against the grain, but I'm like, whose grain is it? And who am I, whose rule am I ascribing to? I can chart my own course and I'll
wow.
be just fine.
Yeah, so that's the beginning. Well, not the beginning. Self love, self worth, all of that is coming, even though you might not have articulated it that way, but it
Correct.
was there just doing these sports, doing, winning. Uh,
Yes, and other things too, because I knew that my identity was not just in one thing. So,
yes.
you know, in high school, I played rugby, I played netball, I did field events, so I would do discus, javelin, like things
Yeah,
that
me
they
too.
said they
Yeah.
were not female. But then I did other things on the other side because I knew I was an intellectual. So I did
Yes.
public speaking. I would read the school announcements. We had a step team, so I was involved in the step team. We had a school council, and I was the vice president of the school council. So I was able to pick and choose and say, these are the things that I gravitate towards. These are the things that I enjoy, and I can cultivate all of these areas of who I am, um, and not apologize for it, and not be confined or compartmentalized in a certain silo.
And that's what we all aim to becoming Natasha, becoming Sharon Lee, becoming who are we becoming? And
Mhm.
especially as young women stepping into this, just step into it bravely. We fall, we get up, because I think we forget sometimes that when we're babies and we see other people walk, we want to do that, and we
Mhm.
keep going. We get in there, we fall down, but we want to do that, and
Exactly.
we do it. And somehow, when we have all that external noise as we get older, says that you can't do that, we
Mhm.
tend to listen to the external noise. So
That's it.
let's, you know, our own validation. We have to validate ourselves. We have to, and
I
love.
appreciate that. That's it. That's it. I definitely appreciate that because I find that a lot of people they don't appreciate self. They don't listen to that voice. And here's the interesting thing. I've also been in situations where, you know, I'm going along this path. This is exactly what I want to do, and I'm getting barrier after barrier after barrier. What I
Right.
learned over the years is that sometimes those blocks are actually beneficial because
Yes.
those blocks then are saying, I don't want you to go down this route. I actually want you to pivot over here. And if you
Yes.
actually pivot over here, I've got something even better for you.
Hmm.
So I've also learned is that, you know, where is my heart taking me? What do I want to do? But if I'm noticing that I'm getting a lot of these roadblocks, I'm also learning that pivoting is not a bad thing either.
Make and choice. We have the choice. Once we become a certain age, we do have choice, even when things go wrong. How we look at it, the mindset behind that. And I know for some of our audience listening to that, they're going, please give me a break. I'm just trying to get out of here. I'm just
Mm,
trying. I'm trying to get my job. I'm trying to find an apartment or whatever it is.
mhm.
And mindset is so important. Knowing you have choices, and
Yeah,
knowing the resilience and the scars can be badges of resilience. you know?
Exactly. And I appreciate that you talk about having choice, because I think a lot of times where you notice that sense of hopelessness is where you feel that your agency or your choices are either gone or they're in the hands
Yes,
of somebody else.
yes,
And being able to say, you know what, I'm just trying to get that job, I'm trying to get that apartment, I'm just trying to move on. Those in and of itself are choices that then could lead to other choices.
yes.
A lot of times we only see what's in front of our face, and
Yeah.
what we don't aim to do is that this choice here in the present can actually lead to something longer
Affect, yes,
term.
yes,
Yes.
yes. And it's okay to fall. It's
Yes.
okay, or whatever people say, to fail at times and
Mhm.
get back up. It happens to everybody. It
Mhm.
happens to everybody. And just again for the youth, I'm saying with social media, it is really difficult to compare yourself against all that's out there and try to
Yes.
be all of that instead of, and it's hard work being all of that too.
That's right.
It's hard work being
I
whoever you want to name, whatever
Yes,
star you want to name, or social media or influencer. It's hard work.
it is.
So let's do the work for yourself and be that the best you can be. Do put that work into yourself. Let
Yeah.
they've done their work wherever it takes them, and a lot of people aren't happy even with all that influencing and social
A lot of
graces.
people, a lot of times, and the one thing I do want to say to the youth as well is that a lot of times what's put out in social media is what has been curated,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
It's what they've decided to put onto social media. A lot of times you will not see the journey that they took to get to that, what
Mm-mm.
they posted on social media. All they're going to post is the result.
Yes,
If someone was actually genuine and posted what led up to them looking a certain way, or having a certain, influence, then you would maybe be able to really see what the process was. But a lot of
yes,
people don't post that. And I
yeah.
think, being able to say, you know what, it may look good, but I mean, I don't know what it took for them to get there. And,
That's
and
right.
again, they're only showing a certain small percentage of who they are.
Yeah, you can have a filter on Zoom but you can't have a filter on your life when you're
Mm,
going through. You
that's
can't
right.
have a filter on your life.
That's right.
So I had a question for you. Like as a psychologist,
Mhm.
when you're out meeting people, let's say you're meeting a partner, whatever, when do you remove that hat? Are you able to remove that hat?
Oh, that is an excellent question. It's fascinating because I think there's a difference between you removing that hat and allowing others to try to keep that hat on you. So
Oh,
Okay. So, when I'm out socially, I have to make the conscious decision and put my boundaries in place to say, I'm Dr. Natasha Williams when I'm in my clinic, in my office, working with other clients and those kinds of things. But the minute I shut the door, I remove my doctor hat and I'm
yes.
Natasha, and I'm navigating through the world because I know that there's more to me than just being a psychologist. It is a part of my life, and it's an important part that I love, but it's not the only part. So when I am out and about in public and enjoying myself, and those types of things, my aim is to be me. And I have to then have that boundary. There are
Yes.
people who would then believe that they have the right, the minute they see me on, in public or whatever, to put that either hat back on me or not
Yes, I
allow
love
me
that.
to take it
Yes.
off.
Yeah.
And with all due respect, um, I do have encounters where people, because I've been on TV and those kinds of things, they see me and they're like, "Oh, Dr. Natasha, how are you?" So I'm able to have those exchanges and encounters. So that's not a problem. Where I find where you have to be very clear on your boundaries is when you have individuals that then want to start, asking you, could you give me advice on this? Can you, I need help with this and those kinds of things. And that's where, I really have to say, with all due respect, I'm not working right now. I'm just here, having a casual dinner, or, I'm just, I'm having my own time. But if this is something you want to discuss further, feel free to reach out to me, and then we can discuss this at a later time. But
Right.
I have to be the curator of my
Yes.
boundaries, because
Yes.
other people, because they know who I am and what I do, may want to infiltrate your own boundary, and they're trying to see how flexible or inflexible those boundaries are. And then once you
Mhm.
let people in like that, you start to lose your own set of boundaries. And I think that's what causes a lot of burnout and a lot of issues
Yes.
with helping professions and psychologists in particular.
Well, I would say how it showed up for me. I was a professional singer for a long time, and people used to see me on TV. And then you'd go somewhere and somebody just happy birthday, and they would go, Sharon Lee, you sing it. You've got the voice. No, no, no. And I had to put, people thought, but people would sometimes be offended
Yes,
that
that's
I wouldn't use the gift and
mhm.
sing happy birthday or sing karaoke or
Yeah,
whatever it is. Or sing, just get up on the stage and sing background with someone. I
wow.
didn't
Yeah.
feel like it,
So what's
so
interesting with that as well is that what I find is that when somebody is offended, now we have a choice. Do we
yes.
do we take responsibility for their offense, or do we keep our boundaries and say, listen, with all due respect, I don't want to do that, and then let them go with with their offense? Because sometimes what we do is we take responsibility for other people's emotions, and then what we do is we blur our boundaries, or we don't even fortify our boundaries. Because there's a difference between setting a boundary and maintaining that
Yeah.
boundary.
And I
So I think
have, well, that's a great point because I have given in. When somebody feels, sometimes you feel, oh, well, okay, all right, I'll do it. It's not what I want to do. So I've
yeah,
already let my boundary
yes,
because I didn't want someone else to feel bad, but
right.
actually, did they feel bad or were they, who knows what it was, but it was, I allowed my boundary to be moved, to
Because a
be
lot of
shifted.
times, what I will tell my clients is, and I use this terminology with all due respect, I said conflict needs to have a home,
Mm-hmm.
which means in any interaction that we have, if you are maintaining your boundaries, it means that you're leaving the exchange outside between the both of you. The
Mm-hmm.
minute that you compromise your boundary, you've now decided to ingest the conflict. I will
Mm-hmm.
take on the discomfort to make sure that you're
You
comfortable.
you feel, oh, yeah, yeah. I don't know if that's womanhood or is that is I don't know if that's kind of like what we women do, but
I
alluding
think
to what you,
there's a societal dialogue
yeah,
in terms of, again, that whole notion of to be a all-encompassing woman means that you have to be self-sacrificial, because if you are too insular or too into yourself, your womanhood ends up being questioned, right? You're not womanly
yes,
enough. And I think we have to come to a space where, if we are going to be looking at our own health and well-being and
hmm,
taking responsibility for that, we have to really start to look at this societal message that has been plaguing us for generations,
hmm,
and continues to do so, because again, it benefits everybody else but ourselves.
yeah, and we need to stop passing that on,
That's right.
uh, as we learn. So I guess I want to ask you because we did talk about. I'm sorry, I forgot about this, but I know that, and it's on on your YouTube where you talk about your marriage
Yes,
and infertility
yes,
and how that affected you.
yes,
And would you want to share a bit of that and just
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's amazing the things that can come up that really start to test you, but also help you to understand who you are. And I'll be also very honest and very candid. It also helped me with my relationship with God as well. So, I was married for just under 10 years, and about maybe the second or third year into the marriage, we were talking about wanting to have kids. My ex-husband decided he wanted to become a police officer, so we were just, making sure things were good. So I had graduated, I had registered with the college, I started my private practice. We got married. He then said he wanted to become a police officer. He went off. I supported him with that. So we're cultivating this life together. Bought the nice home, beautiful, cars, all of that great stuff, hosting our family. Everything is great. So we think the next step is, let's start having a family. And, try it as we may, we were just, not getting pregnant and decided to go to, we just decided, okay, we need medical intervention. We're going to a fertility clinic and did that for 7 years. So it was
Wow.
7 years of medical intervention, hormone injections, introducing
Disappointment,
disappointment after
emotional.
disappointment,
Mm-hmm.
emotional baggage to carry,
Mm-hmm.
questioning myself as well, because you're going through all of, I went through 6 rounds of in vitro fertilization, where,
Wow.
I mean, working literally to pay for this, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As well, plus another additional 3 rounds before the of IVF of IUI. And nothing, no positive result, that kind of thing. Now, the thing for me was is that I'm a woman of faith. So what I would do is say, okay, you know what? I know this is not happening now, but there's a reason for everything. I'm going to pray. I'm going to fast. I'm going to do all of those things. And I thought my partner was with me, because what we ended up finding out, and I think what really, to be very honest, crushed him, and I think this is where the insecure masculinity comes into play, is the diagnosis we had was unexplained infertility.
Mm-hmm.
So they really couldn't find, what the issue was, because they said all of my tests came out, I was healthy, so there was no issues on my end. They did mention that there was some male infertility factor that was part of what was going on, and that was like a bit of a lower sperm count, but should have been remedied with IVF, but it
Yes.
wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward now, we're about, 8 years into, no, almost no, 9 years into our marriage, and, went through my last round of IVF and had an unsuccessful result. And I believe it was 2 weeks later, my ex-husband came to me and said, well, I have another woman pregnant. She's about 3 months along, so the baby's going to be born in March. And I
Mm-hmm.
and this was told to me the October of that previous year. And for me, I was absolutely devastated because it went from we're trying to have a baby and we're trying to start our family to this man just had is telling me not only that he had an affair, but that so I didn't even realize there was another woman in the mix. There was some infidelity a couple years before then, which I caught him, thought we worked it out, and I thought everything was fine. And then come to find out he basically said this. And his excuse was, well, things aren't happening here, so I need to hedge
Mm-hmm.
my bets and I need to make sure that I have a child.
Well,
Um,
was there ever a thought that you would adopt or have a foster
no,
child?
no, not for him, because for
No.
him, because I didn't have that thought either. I said, we're going to keep on
Mm-hmm.
trying. But for him, adoption, even surrogacy, anything of that nature, for him, it de-emasculated him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for him, that's not his biological seed. He really felt
Mm-hmm.
that, what, for him, the raising of the family wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing to him was that he was reproducing his seed, and he
Yes.
wanted to
Yes.
prove that he wasn't the reason. So if
Mm-hmm.
I can get somebody else pregnant, I can now turn around and blame you,
Of course.
because it's not, they're telling us it's unexplained infertility, but I'm going to show you that it's not me, it's you. So, So but now in the midst of all of this, he did not want to leave the marriage. He goes, my marriage is great. I just want to have kids. So you might as well just stay because you can't have kids and you might as well raise mine. So this is the dialogue that kept on
Wow.
going. And I, at one point said, I initially thought I was going to stay. I tried for a couple of months. I'm like, as a Christian woman, through thick and thin till death do us part. And it's very interesting. As the more that I said that, it's the more that God showed me certain things. So God would show me things. For example, found out that the woman that he had this child with, he was in a relationship with for 3 years before that, met her at his workplace and was in a relationship for 3 years. So while he's giving me this whole thing of her and I just wanted to have kids, so I just slept with her when she was ovulating. Like he was giving me this whole story when I found out later that, he'd been in a relationship with her for 3 years. So I'm finding out all of this
He had a few
information.
chapters in his.
There was all of these things happening. My birthday's on Christmas Eve. He took me out for Christmas Eve, and then I found out he, came back home. He said I had to go to work. He went to go see this other woman because he said he had to go check on his child. So he was, teetering on the both things, both relationships, both women, and things were being revealed as I was
Yes.
going along, saying I was going to stay. So
So
I
now
also
you have faith. You're relying on your faith and your resilience and your self-love and all of these things that you thought you had.
exactly, but they had to come in. They had to come even stronger because
Stronger.
they
Yes.
they were inside of me.
You were
But I think
tested.
they usually tested in the fire of affliction.
Oh,
So
I like that. In the fire,
right.
tested in the
So
fire of
what ends up
affliction. Oh.
happening is they all came together, and
Mm-hmm.
literally a word came to me that said, "You were not created for this kind of mediocrity. This is not the life that I created you for." And within that, I said, I'm leaving. I
All
said,
right.
and this is where I took him. Remember I said earlier, the whole notion of putting, your spouse or whatever on the pedestal and not putting
Yes.
God there. I had to
Yes.
take him off because he was trying to dictate to me what my life would be.
Mm-hmm.
You need to stay. You're not going to have kids. You need to just raise mine. You're not going to have anything more than that. I'm the best thing. So he's trying to tell me what my life is. And then when I took him off and said, no, God says that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that he's got amazing things in my future for me. But I have to let go of someone who's no longer yoked to your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
So I left. I left within a week. I told him on like a Monday, and by Friday I was packed up and I moved back with my parents. And
Wow.
I filed for divorce.
Well, I knew part of that story, but I want to thank you for kind of sharing, like really becoming Dr. Natasha. But the wife, the youth, the daughter, and I don't want to say the servant of God, but the
No,
faith.
I know I appreciate that.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
Yes, the
because I think
servant.
there's not a negativity in serving the one who created you. So
Yes.
I appreciate that as
Okay.
well. I think I had no problem sharing my story because I think people think that there's shame in that story, and
Yes,
there's
yes.
no shame. I go
No.
for me to share my story. My hope is that others can see within my story that you can persevere. And that you can also understand who you are. And I told him flat out, I said, I will never be afraid to start over again. And that's it. And
Yes.
now all of the books, everything that I write, everything that I am is informed by my story and my faith. So it was a
Oh,
blessing.
and you are a blessing actually hearing your story and just hearing that it's never too late to start over again. And I would like anybody out there who needs this today, and I'm sure they're, when you're listening to this, I'm not speaking to the audience, to our outraised voices people. um, there's somebody out there who needs to hear this today. We are not alone. And what I say in my own saying, we are God's unfinished work of art. He left the finishing touches to us.
Yeah, I love that.
So be love, Be true to yourself. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for being part of the conversation, this important conversation, because I just want to say to people, being outraised isn't just about being in foster care and adoptee. It's mindset. It's everything. We're bringing these stories so that you know you're not alone. You are not alone. And there used to be a show many, many years ago. I'm old. It was called The Naked City. And they used to say, there are 8 million stories in the naked city. This has been one of them.
There you go.
So I thank you for your conversation. I really thank you, Dr. Natasha Williams, or Dr. Natasha and Natasha. I thank you so very, very much. So all of you out there, reach out, and all your information will be on there. And I appreciate you. Until next time. And I think there will be a next time. I hope there will be a next time.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
yeah, stay blessed, stay healthy, stay loved. All right, everybody. So that was Dr. Natasha. And again, I want to thank her for joining us today in conversation. And I hope to see you next time with a different conversation, a different CEO, a different story, a different journey. So until next time, I'm Sharon Lee Williams for Outraised Voices. And thank you for joining us. So if you enjoyed this episode, I would really love to hear from you. Email me at info@outraisedvoices.com or Sharon Lee Williams @outraisedvoices.com. Who knows? On a future episode, you could be the CEO. Remember, your voice matters.